full-blown trade war between the United States and Canada is now a reality. Washington thought it had the upper hand, but what Canada just did could send shockwaves through the global economy. The question now is, will this move cripple the U.S., or is there an even bigger retaliation waiting? In a dramatic counterstrike, Canada has announced sweeping new tariffs on U.S. goods, hitting over $30 billion worth of American products. But here is where it gets even worse. This is just phase one. If negotiations fail, Canada is prepared to escalate tariffs to a staggering $125 billion in just 21 days. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is not backing down. In a defiant speech, he declared that Canada will not be bullied by U.S. trade policies and vowed to protect its industries at all costs. And here is what makes this even more intense. Canada's retaliation is highly strategic. These tariffs are not just a countermeasure. They are a precision strike aimed directly at American industries that rely on Canadian exports. From oil to agriculture to automotive parts, the impact could be devastating. The first major consequence? Higher prices for American consumers. With Canada controlling a massive portion of the U.S. oil and energy supply, experts warn that these tariffs could trigger an immediate rise in fuel costs. And that is just the beginning. With inflation already a concern, this trade war could push everyday essentials even higher, affecting millions of American households. But here is the real question. Was this a calculated move by Canada, or are they being forced into a corner by U.S. policies? In a fiery response, President Donald Trump warned that the U.S. is ready to take even more aggressive action. But will this escalation lead to a full-scale trade war that neither country can afford? What happens next could change everything. But Canada is not just targeting U.S. industries. There is one move they are making that could hit the American economy even harder. And if this happens, the consequences will be felt across the globe. Stay with us, because the next revelation will shock you. This is not just about tariffs anymore. What Canada just did is a direct challenge to U.S. economic power, and Washington is running out of options. With billions at stake, the question is, can the United States afford this war, or is Canada about to pull off the ultimate trade power move? In a bold escalation, Canada is now restricting key exports to the U.S., directly targeting industries that are already struggling with supply chain disruptions. We are talking about raw materials, industrial metals, and even vital energy resources. The impact? Massive price surges in the U.S. and an economic standoff unlike anything seen before. Energy has always been Canada's trump card, and now they are leveraging it as a weapon. The United States imports nearly 4 million barrels of Canadian crude oil daily. But if Canada cuts even a fraction of that supply, fuel costs in America will skyrocket, crippling industries and consumers alike. Experts warn that the price of gasoline could surge overnight, impacting everything from transportation to food prices. If Washington does not act fast, this could spiral into a full-blown economic crisis. And here is the kicker. Canada is not stopping at energy. They are also moving to disrupt the U.S. automotive industry, which relies heavily on Canadian-manufactured parts and raw materials. This could send production costs soaring for companies like Ford, General Motors, and Tesla. With factories already struggling to recover from past supply chain disruptions, this move could put tens of thousands of American jobs at risk. Automakers are warning of massive delays, and consumers are about to feel the effects firsthand. But here is where it gets even worse. Canada is already in talks with a new trade partner that could completely shift the balance of power. And if this deal goes through, Washington may be facing its biggest economic nightmare yet. Stay with us, because what happens next could change the global economy forever. The economic war between the United States and Canada is no longer just a North American problem. Global markets are now feeling the shockwaves, and world leaders are scrambling to protect their economies from what could be the biggest trade disruption in decades. With Canada shifting its oil exports away from the U.S. and forging stronger trade deals with China and the European Union, Washington's global influence is starting to erode. Foreign markets are adjusting, and the consequences for the U.S. could be irreversible. For decades, the United States controlled the flow of global trade, dictating policies that shaped international commerce. But with Canada, Mexico, and key Asian economies now looking elsewhere, is the U.S. losing its economic stronghold? And here is the brutal reality. This trade war is not just about governments and policies. It is about everyday people. Rising prices on fuel, food, and goods are squeezing American families, and businesses are being forced to make tough choices that could change the job market forever. But here is the biggest question yet. Does the United States still have a winning move left, or has it already lost the trade war? The next decisions made by Washington could determine America's future on the global stage. And the most shocking twist? Canada may not even be the biggest threat anymore, because as this trade war heats up, a new global player has just entered the battlefield, and their next move could change everything. Stay with us, because this is far from over. Just when Washington thought it was only battling Canada and Mexico, a new superpower has entered the trade war. And this time, the stakes are even higher, because their influence could tip the balance of global economic power away from the United States forever. In a stunning turn of events, China and Russia have just announced a joint economic alliance, working to undermine U.S. trade influence by strengthening their partnerships with Canada, Mexico, and the European Union. The United States is now facing an unprecedented economic threat. For years, the United States used tariffs as a weapon to control trade. But now, those very tariffs have pushed former allies into the arms of America's biggest economic rivals. With new trade routes and energy deals bypassing Washington, the consequences for the U.S. economy could be devastating. And here is where it gets even worse. American businesses are now struggling to keep up. With restricted access to raw materials and key imports, the cost of goods is skyrocketing. The next move by Washington could determine whether the U.S. economy survives or collapses under its own policies. So what happens next? Does the United States double down on its economic war, risking total isolation from key global markets? Or is this the moment Washington has no choice but to negotiate? One thing is clear: the world is watching, and the next decision could reshape global power forever. And here is what no one saw coming. The next move in this trade war is not coming from Washington. Stay with us, because the biggest power shift yet is about to unfold. After weeks of mounting pressure, Washington has finally responded. But instead of backing down, the United States is now launching an aggressive counterattack, one that could either restore its global dominance or send its economy spiraling into chaos. In a bold and controversial decision, the U.S. has just announced new tariffs and economic sanctions aimed directly at its former trade partners. The message is clear. If they want to challenge American trade power, Washington has just escalated this trade war to a whole new level, one that could change everything. These new policies target not just Canada and Mexico, but also nations that have aligned with China and Russia. Billions of dollars in tariffs are now in play, and industries across the world are bracing for impact. But here is the real question. Will this gamble work? On one hand, some American industries are celebrating, calling this move a victory for domestic production. Gas prices soaring, food prices skyrocketing, American families facing economic uncertainty. This is the price of war. As prices on everything from fuel to groceries could skyrocket overnight, with global markets already in turmoil, some warn that the U.S. is pushing itself further into economic isolation. But others argue that this could be the wake-up call needed to rebuild America's self-sufficiency. So which is it? Economic revival or a devastating miscalculation? And here is the most shocking twist. Because what is coming next is not about trade. It is about global power itself. It is about something far bigger. Stay with us, because what happens next could change America forever. The economic war has now transformed into something much bigger. This is no longer just about tariffs or trade deals. This is now a global power struggle. With alliances shifting and economies on edge, the fight for global leadership has begun. For decades, the United States has been the dominant force in global trade. But with the latest economic moves, new alliances are emerging. And for the first time in history, Washington may not be calling the shots anymore. As China and Russia strengthen economic ties with former U.S. allies, American influence is beginning to fade. Some countries are abandoning the U.S. dollar in favor of alternative trade currencies, and the results could shake the financial world to its core. And here is the dangerous reality. If Washington does not act fast, it could lose control over the global financial system. Without trade dominance, the entire U.S. economy is at risk of collapse. Some experts warn that this is not just an economic crisis, it is a geopolitical chess match. If the U.S. fails to reclaim its position, it could be looking at the biggest economic downfall in modern history. But what Washington does next will not just impact the economy, it could redefine the future of global power itself. Stay with us, because the next chapter in this crisis is about to unfold. This is it, the moment of truth. The fate of U.S. global leadership is hanging by a thread. Trade wars, political tensions, and economic uncertainty have brought the world to a breaking point. But now, Washington faces the most critical decision of all: fight back or risk losing its superpower status forever. With nations moving away from U.S. trade influence, the dollar's supremacy is under threat. Washington's next move could either restore confidence in the American economy or send it into an irreversible downward spiral. The consequences of failure are staggering: a weaker currency, skyrocketing inflation, industries collapsing under uncertainty. But the real question remains: does the United States have the power to reverse this course? As Washington weighs its options, the battle for economic control is no longer just about trade. It is about security, power, and survival. Because if the U.S. loses its grip, the world as we know it will never be the same. The final decision is coming. A historic shift in global power is about to unfold. But will America come out on top? Or is this the beginning of the end? Stay with us, because what happens next will rewrite history. We have reached the turning point. The biggest trade war in modern history has ignited a battle far beyond tariffs and policies. This is about global power, financial survival, and the future of the world economy. As Washington scrambles to regain control, the consequences of this crisis will not just shape trade. They will determine whether the United States can maintain its position as a global superpower. Some believe America must double down on its economic warfare to protect its industries and global influence. Others warn that this strategy could backfire, leading to permanent financial instability, global de-dollarization, and an economic collapse unlike anything seen before. But here is the final question: will Washington fight its way back to dominance? Or is this the moment when a new world order begins? Because no matter what happens next, this is a global power shift that will change everything. Stay with us, because the next move will decide the future of world economics.